Hey guys, trying something a little bit different today in the old danger room. Welcome. It's me, Dan. Today we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about: guns and Gorns. That's a weird combo, right? And I definitely want to just start out by saying this is like a serious, emotional topic. It's a sensitive topic, not one that I'm trying to make light of in any way. The recent school shootings have provoked a major discussion about gun rights, mental health, and the fact that we have more firearms in this country than most industrialized countries. Not any, not all. As a libertarian-minded person and like a father of young children, I got two really young kids. I have super mixed thoughts about all of this, really mixed thoughts and emotions, and I invite you to join me in this conversation. I really want to talk about it with you people because I'm trying to work through feelings on both sides. Look, I'm not a gun nut. I don't own a gun. Okay. But I am a true believer in the importance of the Second Amendment. Like, it's there for some pretty good reasons. But we'll talk about those too. Those are kind of mixed. Like, I'm one of those guys that there's a lot of talk lately about people being free speech fetishists. I find that term a little disturbing because I truly believe in the importance of the First Amendment above and beyond all others. It's like the core freedom that all our other freedoms come from. So it's really important to me. Those people that talk about First Amendment fetishists, that doesn't jibe with me very well. What I'm definitely not is a founding fathers fetishist. Like, I believe those guys had incredible self-interest. I believe that the Bill of Rights as well as the Constitution were exercises in compromise, the first constitutional conventions and stuff, and like different groups of people working it out. It's really part of what is kind of cool about the United States that I really love. I really like the fact that it's not one rule of law in every state. Like, I like you could move to Oregon and have no sales tax, or you could move to Nevada and have no state tax, or Alaska and you could get UBI, or like you could move to California and get taxed the maximum like I do. I love it here. I'm never going anywhere. It's worth it to me. Guys, I got a few people out there already. Please chime in the comments. Let me know what you're thinking about this thing. But I'm going to try and tie this all together, right? How do I tie together these terrible shootings and like pop culture? How do those two things tie in together? Like, what's the connection? I think that there is a real trend in our pop culture towards division right now. I've been watching, there's only one show I'm really watching right now. It's Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And they had a big thing about the Gorn, right? They're bringing back the Gorn as the scary threat in Star Trek. And the Arena is my all-time favorite episode of Star Trek. And I'll bet it's, for many people, it is. Like, that is just such a memorable episode for so many reasons. The use of like really hard science in it, as well as really cool kind of twist ending. The twist ending being like that the Gorn were actually being threatened, right? They weren't the aggressors in the situation. And Kirk had to, once he realized that, he showed compassion, and that's what let the Metrons declared him to be the winner after a little science experiment involving the natural riches of the planet and putting them together and making, spoiler alert, making a gun that shoots diamonds. Spawning the phrase, diamonds are not a Gorn's best friend. No one's ever said that before. I coined it. I'm sorry, or you're welcome, depending on your perspective on that one. Where am I going with this, guys? The fact is, it was that gun connection in that episode that got me thinking about all this stuff, because in the latest episode, the character Lon Noonien Singh, some kind of ancestor or relation to Khan, who was brought up on like a Gorn world, and she said in the most recent episode, excuse me, she said the Federation teaches that if we can find a way to empathize with an enemy, they can one day become our friends. They're wrong. Some things in the universe are just plain evil. Now, I hope that was a setup for to say that that's not true, but I really have the feeling that this is the writer's room and the way they really feel about people they don't agree with. And that we're in the business these days of othering folks. We're gornifying our enemies, right? And this happens coming from the left and coming from the right, right? I come from a libertarian perspective. I'm going to put it right out there, okay? I didn't vote for Donald Trump, but I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton either. Who did I vote for? Joe Jorgensen. Go look it up. It's a female Joe, by the way. So I view things from a different perspective. I truly believe in the freedom of the Second Amendment, right? Like there is the possibility, I should say, that we'll have to rise up against our government. And a lot of people, I see the meme out there a lot of times, are people that love to like tweet or post on Facebook and be like, well, you want your guns for your to defend yourself against the government? They've got drones and tanks and bombs and they got everything. You have no hope. To which I say, like, tell that to the Taliban. Tell that to, tell that to the Afghans. Tell that to any kind of like insurgent force. So there's that perspective, is that like you don't need much really, even you can use different tactics would mean different things in that kind of scenario. But so people go, well, we can't have a bazooka, right? And we've got laws on the books against machine guns. By the way, a history of gun control laws in this country that were often created for racist purposes, to keep guns out of the hands of freed slaves, freed blacks after the Civil War. There was a ton of stuff, gun control, specific gun control from a white conservative group. And besides that, now we come to the present, we don't have those, let's say we don't have those racist laws anymore. Although I've got a little cartoon we're going to look at a little bit later to show some government-sponsored racism. But so everybody had, nobody wants you to have a bazooka or machine guns, right? So like already everyone is pretty much willing to accept that as like a common sense gun law. I think part of the problem really is a lack of knowledge too on the public's part. And today I'm going to delve into some of the specifics of gun deaths in the US. I got a Pew Research thing we'll take a look at. But I want to talk about, first of all, the difference, like what an AR-15 means, what an assault rifle means. Because there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of, I don't want to say misinformation or disinformation, but there's a lot of confusion around those kind of things, right? A lot of people, when they see those guns, an AR-15 or that style, by the way, that stands for like Armalite, not assault rifle. These are all the little details that the gun nuts and the anti-gun absolutists, maximalists like to argue about. I don't think those things matter that much. But here, let's talk about the real specifics of guns in kind of in a neutral way, because like I said, I'm not a gun nut, but I believe people should have the right to bear arms, to own weapons. But I'm also willing to accept that there are limits to that, right? And so a lot of people think that an AR-15 or an assault rifle, whatever you want to call it, is like a machine gun, right? So that's absolutely not what it is. It's a semi-automatic rifle. So it's a long gun, but it's essentially just like any semi-automatic handgun, like a Glock, anything, not a revolver, but a semi-automatic, meaning you pull the trigger once, you get one bullet. Fast as you pull the trigger, pretty much. Boom, one, 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 one. You can pull pretty fast. And they got those bump stocks and things that, by the way, which Trump made illegal after the Las Vegas shooting. The crazy dude in the hotel used a bump stock to simulate like automatic weapons. And say what you will about Trump, I'm no fan, but he did push to outlaw. That was common sense gun control, right? Who people didn't need that. We saw great deaths because of it. Brian Garside, hey, watch it. Thanks, Brian. I hate what libertarian has become. I totally agree with you, Brian. I was a libertarian as well until it became the far right crazies. Well, I think it's our job to take it back from the far right crazies, Brian, because I don't think it's an either or thing. I totally agree with you. Like far right libertarianism is not only sometimes just a thin veneer and a thin disguise over just far right extremism and racism, but it also, that perception unfairly paints what libertarianism really is, like the libertarian movement and the party itself and the stated goals of the party. So I'm with you, Brian. I feel you on this. But there's nuance here, right? So anyway, I was talking about automatic weapons. So it's no different than a handgun, right? So why is it more dangerous? And some would argue it is not, but I would definitely argue that it is, because it's the idea of a rifle is a super dangerous weapon from someone because they can defend themselves from a long range with high accuracy. That's really what this is about. And a decent rate of speed. Like somebody with one of those rifles and the high ground or the proper position can be a menace. Right? Could be like the dude who climbed the bell tower and shot those students. So I totally get it that they are more dangerous. It is more dangerous in that way than a handgun. On the other hand, handguns far and away cause more deaths. And we could prove it. I want to share my screen. I'm going to look at let's look at this Pew Research deal. Here we go. Gun deaths in the U.S. Okay, 10 key questions answered. Let's pop this puppy up and let's take a look. You can find this thing at the Pew Research Center. Okay, what the data says about gun deaths in the U.S. Let's go through this. Let's dive into it. It's not too long. And you could say it's Pew for pew, pew, pew. You could say it's Pew because it stinks. All of these jokes are fair game to me. Okay, so what the data says about gun deaths. More Americans died of gun-related injuries in 2020 than in any other year on record, according to recently published statistics from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. That included a record number of gun murders, as well as a near record number of gun suicides. Despite the increase in such fatalities, the rate of gun deaths, a statistic that accounts for the nation's growing population, remains below the levels of earlier years. The rate of deaths is lower, but the number is the highest because our population is higher. That's interesting. That's an interesting nuance I hadn't considered. By the way, the Center for Disease Control was until recently not allowed to release statistics about gun deaths by law because of, I believe, Republican-sponsored legislation under Trump. They weren't allowed to talk about it, and they are now. Okay, so here's a closer look at gun deaths in the United States based on a Pew Research Center analysis of data from the CDC, the FBI, and other sources. You can also read key public opinions about the U.S. gun violence and gun policy in our recent roundup. Okay, how many people die from gun-related injuries in the U.S. each year? Suicides accounted for more than half of U.S. gun deaths in 2020. Okay, here's the percentage of gun deaths by type. 54% suicide, 43% murder. I don't know what the other includes gun deaths that were unintentional, okay, involved law enforcement, or had undetermined circumstances. In 2020, the most recent year for which complete data is available, 45,222 people died from gun-related injuries in the U.S., according to the CDC. That figure includes gun murders and gun suicides, along with 3 other less common types of gun-related deaths tracked by the CDC. Those that were unintentional, those that involved law enforcement, and those whose circumstances could not be determined. Okay. What share of U.S. gun deaths are murders and what share are suicides? Though they tend to get less public attention than gun-related murders, suicides have long accounted for the majority of U.S. gun deaths, 54%. What share of all murders and suicides in the U.S. involve a gun? Nearly 8 in 10, 79% U.S. murders involved a firearm, 19,000 out of 24,000. That marked the highest percentage since at least 1968, the earliest year for which the CDC has online records. A little over half, 53% of all suicides in 2020 involved a gun, a percentage that has generally remained stable in recent years. How has the number of gun deaths changed over time? Okay, the most on record were the 45,000 deaths in 2020, a 14% increase from the year before, a 25% increase from 5 years earlier, and 43% increase from a decade prior. Gun murders, in particular, have climbed sharply in recent years. 19,000 gun murders that took place in 2020 were the most since at least 1968. The number of gun suicides has also risen in recent years, climbing 10% over 5 years and 25% over 10 years, and is near its highest point on record. Okay, the number of suicides were the most in any year except 2018. How has the rate of U.S. gun deaths changed over time? While 2020 saw the highest total number of gun deaths in the U.S., we're going to get to this for sure, Brian. I wasn't paying attention to the chat. I got to pay more attention. I'm going to get your comments in a second, Brian. I want to finish this article real quick. U.S. gun suicide and gun murder rate has increased in recent years, but remains below past highs. Okay, that's good to know. The gun murder and suicide rates in the U.S. both remain below their peak levels. Which states have the highest and lowest gun death rates in the U.S.? This is interesting. Okay, for all the talk you hear about Chicago and gun deaths, right? Like, so let me see if I can zoom in on this a little bit more. Yeah, that's nice. Okay, look at this map. So it's pretty clear that the most gun deaths are in the deepest red states. This is pretty clear. DC's high, and they don't have the right to protect themselves with guns, but like, not what you would have, not what the right-wing media would have you believe when they talk about democratically controlled states having the highest rates of gun death. I think right here, it's more of a mixed bag than that, but it's pretty not true. Okay, Texas, pretty low rate, according to this. Then again, we saw what happened there. Okay, the rate of gun fatalities varies widely from state to state. In 2020, the states with the highest rates of gun-related deaths, counting murder, suicide, and all other categories tracked by the CDC, included Mississippi, Louisiana, Wyoming, Missouri, and Alabama. The states with the lowest rates included New York, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Hawaii. Okay, this is telling us something. How does the gun death rate in the U.S. compare with other countries? And this is what Brian is talking about. The gun death rate in the U.S. is much higher in most other countries, but still far below the rates in several Latin American countries, according to a 2018 study of 195. Maybe we'll look at that too. The U.S. gun death rate was 10.6 per 100,000 people in 2016, the most recent year in the study. How many people are killed in mass shootings in the U.S. every year? It's a difficult question to answer because there's no single agreed upon definition of the term mass shooting. Definitions can vary depending on factors including the number of victims and circumstances on the shooting. The FBI collects data on what they call active shooter incidents. Excuse me. Which it defines as one or more individuals actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area. Using the FBI's definition, 38 people, including the shooters, died in such incidents in 2020. Okay. How has the number of mass shootings in the U.S. changed over time? So tracking, this is based on the FBI's statistics of active shooter incidents. This is alarming, right? In 20 years to see a gain from each one of these is one shooting. So there were 3 in the year 2000. We had 40 in the year 2020. That is super disturbing. Brian said that that stat is all you needed to see. U.S. accounts for as many guns as all the rest of the world combined. He points to Wikipedia stat. We can take a look at that. The same definitional issue that makes it challenging to arrive at an exact number of mass shooting fatalities comes into play when trying to determine the frequency of U.S. mass shootings over time. The unpredictability of these incidents also complicates matters. As Rand Corp noted in a research brief, chance variability in the annual number of mass shooting incidents makes it challenging to discern a clear trend, and trend estimates will be sensitive to outliers and to the time frame chosen for analysis. The FBI found an increase in active shooter incidents between 2000 and 2020. No shit. Okay, which types of firearms are most commonly used in gun murders in the U.S.? See, this is where it becomes important to think about data, right? If the goal is bringing down the number of deaths, this is where I'm not sure whether banning assault rifles or assault style weapons makes sense or not. I'm leaning towards yes, because I think they are more dangerous and there's far less of a public need to use one. But that's a tricky one. Okay, in 2020, handguns were involved in 59% of the U.S. gun murders and non-negligent manslaughters, according to the FBI. Rifles, the category that includes guns, sometimes referred to as assault weapons, were involved in 3% of firearm murders. Shotguns were involved in 1%. The remainder of gun homicides and non-negligent manslaughters, 36%, involved other kinds of firearms or those classified as type not stated. I mean, this statistic is really telling. If we just want to talk about, just divorce your emotion and child deaths aside. Let's make every death equal. And I think that's reasonable. Like a child death is horrible, but, anybody killed by a mass shooter, that's horrible, right? So, or any kind of murder, 3%. So if the idea, though, is to cut down on the mass shooters, I'm interested in knowing, that's a breakdown they don't give here, is of these active shooter incidents that they talked about. How many of those used assault weapons? I think that's telling. Okay. It says here 6 countries in the Americas account for half of all firearm deaths. By the way, Brazil is number 1 with more than 43,000 deaths, followed by other Latin American nations and the United States. Right. So this is not just a problem in America, it's a problem in the Americas. What's the answer to this, guys? I don't really know. Okay, Brian says the USA loves guns. The U.S. ratio of guns is 120 firearms per 100 residents. The next countries are Yemen, Serbia, Montenegro, Uruguay, and Canada. Right? Interesting that Canada is looking to try and do some type of handgun ban totally. I honestly think that if your goal is to reduce deaths, you got to get rid of the handguns. I think it feels good to get rid of the rifles. Somehow it feels it's a very emotional victory for people, right? Because these weapons look scary. And they are scary. Don't get me wrong. All guns are scary. I fucking hate guns, okay? I'm not into them. But I really believe people should have the right to own them. Now, I'm waffling here because it's such a difficult thing. I feel like this is the split that's going on in our country right now over this issue. And I don't know what the answer is. I think a voluntary gun buyback program, I would be interested in seeing that. Australia did that. I think the idea that guns don't need registration is frankly a little silly. That reminds me, I wanted to take a look at this. Okay, this is something my pal Andrew Neal, actually, he was a guest once on my show. See, Brian says there's no need in any modern society to have guns of any kind. But Brian, I wonder, like, you don't take seriously at all the idea that people need the ability to rise against the government under extreme circumstances. And I mean, I think that's to say that we would never need to, I think, is to not look at history and not look at current events all over the world too. So I don't want to have guns, but I don't think it's realistic to assume we're not going to have them anytime soon. But Charles Schultz pointed out a pretty cool irony with this series of strips. A lot of people saw this strip, and I'll admit I was one of those people that thought this image of Snoopy with the assault rifle was like a hack, like somebody made that. But this comes from the actual website of the Peanut strips. This was a 4-day series where Charlie Brown comes to renew Snoopy's dog license, and it keeps getting harder and harder. He's got to take an eye test for that, and then he has to pass a driver's test, and then he has to get a fishing license. And so, yes, ma'am, we got the new dog license and the driver's license and a fishing license. Now, she says you don't need a license for that. Okay, Charles Schultz, social justice warrior, absolutely was. Especially if you heard about like the introduction of Franklin, one of the first Black Peanuts character, and Schultz threatened to. Newspapers didn't want to run the strip that had Franklin and Charlie Brown like being buddies and playing, hanging out, integrating, if you will. And he's like, okay, then you can just not run Peanuts. How about that? Mwah, love it. Great move, Chuck. And I think this is one where a guy who is absolutely not known as being a political guy or rocking the boat is being explicitly political. And just, if nothing else, just pointing out the absurdity of this fact that you can't drive a car, you can't catch a fish, you can't have a dog without a license, yet there's still many states where gun license is not required. Safety training is not required. It just boggles the mind. Like, so if you're to me, that's the answer, is that if you're going to allow current levels of gun ownership, and you have to require safety and training, there's even some people talk about like off-site storage for guns being necessary. I don't know that's, I think things like that push gun ownership into the hands of those with more money. And I think that's wrong. Frankly, if only rich people had guns, that's probably as bad as only criminals having guns. Brian says the wrong people are the ones who will rise up against the government. It's never the rational world reason, folks. It's the far fringe fools. Then you have to call our founding fathers far fringe fools. I don't see how you could do that. I think maybe even they were the far fringe fools of their time for demanding taxation, no taxation without representation, and for wanting control of their own destiny, and for wanting not to have to quarter soldiers and other things. So, Brian, I love you. You're a sponsor of this show, so I'm not going to argue with you. But I think this is not always true. Is it often true? Is it probably most often true? Yes. Yes. But then it's also in other countries, it's the same way. All these wars that we get into overseas and foment and create regime change wars that create rebel groups within those countries and create infighting or proxy wars that we engage in, like in Syria and Yemen. We create these fringe people. And in those countries, those rebels, they need those weapons, right? And so that's a situation. It's just one that for far too long, people in this country didn't think we could ever be in that situation, like it was impossible. But then you start to see how quickly things can change, how far and how fast things can swing in an instant. Now, do I think that we're likely to have like a far right fascist government uprising that we need to fight against physically? I don't know. I can't rule it out. That's the problem, right? And if you can't rule it out, but then you say take away all the guns, it's kind of like that old sci-fi thing, right? Where the world finally gets together and there's world peace, and we put aside all wars and all of our differences, and that's exactly when the aliens attack, right? Because now we don't have any, we're defenseless, right? We don't know how to fight anymore. You forgot I'm Canadian. You're still seditious rebels to me. Brian, I really want to know what you think about the Canadian, the current proposition about Canadian gun control. And I'm not even totally up to speed on it. Canadian gun legislation. Let me see. There was something in here on the news. Let's see what we got. Canada to cap the market for handguns with new legislation. Let's take a look at this, okay? Let's do it. Sorry for the heavy content today, guys. Not many people watching on the stream. I realize this is different, but I'll be honest. I love comics. I'm always going to talk about comics, but I'm so interested in so many other things that I don't know. That's what Danger Room's all about, right? If you want comics, come back Thursday. By the way, Thursday, I'm going to do $1 Million Mailbox for sure this week. I skipped last week. I took a little break. But we'll be back on Thursday for that $1 Million Mailbox, a bunch of new comics, and Friday for Serious Star Trek, which I'm really loving. We'll circle back to Gorns maybe at the end here. All right. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government introduced legislation Monday that will put a freeze on importing, buying, or selling handguns. We are capping the number of handguns in this country, Trudeau said. The regulation to halt the growth of personally owned handguns is expected to be enacted this fall. Immediately, the price of handguns is going to skyrocket in Canada. Okay, this is what a black market does. It'll be illegal to buy, sell, transfer, or import handguns anywhere in Canada, the Prime Minister said. You can't transfer them. This is going to create a black market. Canada already has plans to ban 1,500 types of military-style firearms and offer a mandatory buyback program that will begin at the end of the year. It has already expanded background checks. Now, background checks, hard to be against background checks. But there are plenty who are. They don't want to have a national gun registry or background checks because they feel like having a list of who has the guns is the first step towards taking away all the guns. To which I say, you're not wrong. But if we want to live in a safe society and you want to have your rights to have your guns, they're going to have to give something back. It's going to have to be the training, the licensing. I feel like that's the only sensitive alternative on the table right now. In Canada, gun ownership is a privilege, not a right, Blair said. And this is a critical difference. This is a principle that differentiates ourselves from many other countries in the world, notably our colleagues and friends to the south. In Canada, guns are only intended to be used for hunting and sport purposes, eh? Canada has far fewer mass shootings than the US, in part because of a lack of easy access to guns. Though the US population is far larger than Canada's. Yeah. I think comparing the number of mass shootings is apples and oranges. That's an unfair comparison. You need to compare the rates. Blair noted guns are often smuggled in illegally from the US, which he noted has one of the largest small arms arsenals in the world. The government plans to fight gun smuggling and trafficking by increasing criminal penalties, providing more tools to investigate firearms crimes, and strengthening border measures, Trudeau said. Increased funding already helped border officials double the amount of smuggled guns confiscated at the U.S. border. The government also said the bill would allow for removal of gun licenses for people involved in acts of domestic violence or criminal harassment, such as stalking. Can't see anything much wrong with that. The bill would create a new red flag law, allowing courts to require that people considered a danger to themselves or others surrender their firearms to police. The government said the measure would guard the safety of those applying through the process, often women in danger of domestic abuse, by protecting their identities. So it's saying you have to apply for the right to a gun, but it's going to be secret? No, the bill would create a red flag. Okay. The government said the measure would guard the safety of those applying through the process. I'm having a hard time parsing exactly what that means. Brian says, I think we have pretty decent gun control here. I wouldn't mind a gun ban. I grew up with guns in my family. My grandparents were farmers, but my life will still be complete without them. Yeah, I don't personally like them, but I can't let that be my determining factor in whether people should be allowed to have them or not. This is where I'm running into some problems here. Can we do that? What's better, that? I guess maybe that. Canada can teach us a lot, tweeted Bruce Heyman, former ambassador to Canada under the Obama administration. The government said it will require rifle magazines to be permanently altered so they can never hold more than 5 rounds, and will ban the sale and transfer of large capacity magazines under the criminal code. That seems like a pretty basic one, although it's also one that's like so easy to circumvent, I would think. Trudeau said his government recognizes the vast majority of Canadians who own guns are responsible, but the levels of gun violence is unacceptable. This is a concrete and real national measure to long way toward this is a concrete and real national measure to long way toward keeping Canadians safe, Trudeau said ungrammatically. The new measures are assured of passing in Canada's parliament as the ruling liberals and leftist opposition New Democrats have enough votes. Pierre Poilievre, who is considering to be leader of the Conservative Party, said law-abiding gun owners should be respected and dangerous criminals should be jailed. Undeniably true. I think this is interesting. This is something that would never fly in the United States current political climate. I want to talk about that in a second too. The Buffalo shooter, and I talked about this before, the New Zealand shooter, the Christchurch shooter. Your founding fathers couldn't have conceived of the weapons that we have today. The bullet was not invented for another 50 years. The first modern handgun was invented. I think this is another argument that I hear a lot. And it doesn't fly with me because they had the state-of-the-art weapons of the day, right? They had the best that they could have. And it was, so maybe they couldn't have conceived of it, but maybe they could have. I don't know. That's a tough one to say. I don't think that the efficiency of the killing machine necessarily makes a big difference, but then again, we have outlawed automatic weapons. You cannot buy an automatic weapon anymore in the United States. Certain people can have them under grandfathered laws. But these laws that Canada is proposing about handguns, we have in the United States for machine guns, right? We already have prohibition against the kind of weaponry that the military uses. I don't care. You cannot, those who come at me with nobody needs an AR-15 military style handgun, is all they are saying is they don't understand what, or military style gun, rather not handgun, is just saying they don't understand what that means. Truly. And I'm not trying to be offensive to anybody or rude or be like, technically that's not, but it's such a critical distinction that I feel is so fundamentally misunderstood. That it bears repeating, right? Most people that are that say they want to ban assault weapons really think they're machine guns. Honestly do. I know they are not, but I think that there is an argument, you said, that they're more dangerous than, say, a bolt action hunting rifle, right? So I could see making illegal semi-automatic rifles. Frankly, I could see making illegal semi-automatic handguns too for similar reasons, right? These are all just like sort of technological distinctions that the law has decided matter in the regulation of this fundamental right, right? Like we don't have the rights that we claim we do. Now, would a lot of these Second Amendment advocates, of which I am one to a certain degree, but would they say we should have machine guns or bazookas? I used to say yes. That was before I had kids, I think. But it's really nothing more than the same argument that Brian was making here. The founding, like, the fact is, as a society, we've got the right to regulate against these things. And it's been proven in the law that they can do so. And it is not viewed as like an egregious breach of personal freedoms to not be able to own a bazooka or a machine gun. So is this incrementally moving us towards getting rid of all guns? That is what the argument would be. And that's why Second Amendment folks and NRA and gun lobbyists that's their argument against these kind of laws, any kind of gun control laws. That don't fit their purposes, I'll say. The NRA itself, that's the thing, the lobbyists. There's a lot, we want to blame lobbyists. I see the lobbyists and the NRA being blamed for so many things. Now, they're not great organizations necessarily, although I'm sure they do some good. But it's the Congress, it's the senators and congressmen and that make the laws and vote on them. To blame the lobbies and the lobbyists is a complete deflection of responsibility from the lawmakers who have who have a duty to keep their constituents safe, right? And this is kind of where I come down on it, is that if we were in a perfect world where everybody was responsible, then absolutely you should be able to own any guns you can. But when we're in this world where we're seeing a clear increasing number in active shooter incidents, clearly something is happening. It's the psyche and it's the culture at large that's doing this. So let's bring it back to Buffalo and Christchurch, because I don't think the Uvalde guy, I think he was just a nutcase. I haven't heard anything about like a manifesto or a political message, that axe to grind that he might have had. But the Buffalo guy did, for sure. And he was mirroring and aping the Christchurch guy, who was very explicit about his political goals. Even in New Zealand, that shooting was designed to provoke outrage in the United States, to provoke gun control laws, anti-gun laws, to accelerate our path towards a civil war. That is, I'm not making this up. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the guy's stated goals, okay? You can look it up. You can find that manifesto. It was scrubbed from the internet, but like anything, you can find it. And I read it. I remember reading it back then and talking to a few people about it. And they're like, why would you read that? Why would you even read it, let alone talk about it? And I go, man, you got a guy who did something unfathomable going into a mosque or a church or whatever and just wiping out human life, or into a school. And then they wrote a 200-page document explaining why in their twisted head they did it. Yeah, I want to read it. Yeah, I want to know. Because, I want to know, what are the influences on this person? What are the misconceptions that have been inculcated in their crazy mind? And I want to fight that with correct information, not by just sweeping things under a rug. When you sweep it under a rug and say, do not look at that, do not talk about this, all you're doing is drawing attention to it. You're Streisand affecting it, right? And you're making even more of these crazies go, oh, this is that hot info they don't want us to see. And it ironically lends credence to the nonsense of these people, where what it should have been is there should have been an expose on his manifesto. And maybe I'll do one of these, because you need to take these people and pick apart their logic, because it's flimsy. It's held together by, a great replacement theory and other far right fringe and far left fringe ideas. Those people who think that, living where I live in Humboldt County is where you get to see the true overlap, the true nuts in our society. There's a lot of them from the right wing. There's a huge amount from the left wing too. And a huge amount of them that are apolitical, right? Like the anti-vax movement, for instance. Far from a strictly right-wing phenomenon. This is, I live in an area where tons of people don't vaccinate their kids with measles and mumps and stuff because they don't trust the government. The back to the land movement and everything else that drove the hippies to Humboldt County is it actually binds. These things are not binary, and we like to think they are, and we like to see the country we think the country is going to cleave into, right? And all the people we like and agree with are going to be on our side, and all those other people are terrible people. They're Gorns, right? To bring it back, they're Gorns, and some things in this universe are just plain evil. They're bad. If you like guns, you're bad. If you like social justice, you're bad. There's no room in the middle of that for somebody who would say be pro-gun and pro-social justice. Tons of those people exist. Separatists on the white side and black separatists. There's black separatists who firmly believe that the black community should rise up and have more gun ownership and assert their rights in that way to take control of their own destiny. Are they just as crazy as the white nationalists? Yes, but just as crazy as everybody else, right? Anybody who gets into the idea that your political feelings of the moment are absolutely correct and unchangeable, I don't know, is not very introspective, is not looking at all the facts, is not thinking about things very hard. I think about this stuff a lot, and I waffle back and forth. And this is where I have a hard time firmly finding a camp to agree with on a lot of these matters. Even abortion, things like abortion, like, yeah, you're killing somebody. I don't know, draw the line where you want. At some point, you're killing somebody. But our society kills people all the time, from death penalty to wars that we fight, to assassinations, above board and below board, whatever. Like, we kill people. So, like, this is a decision we make. We kill some ostensibly to protect other lives. And if you believe like I do, you should have complete control over your own body, then of course you should have the right to kill anything that's growing inside of your body. But let's not sugarcoat it, and let's not try and get into a thing where you live in a zone of complete moral purity, where it's not a life that you're ending. It is, but that is an acceptable trade-off in my mind to protect the life of the woman. And by life, I mean just her life, her autonomy. On top of her, of course, her physical health, and whatever reason a woman might choose to have an abortion. That's a conversation between her and her doctor, right? Okay, so like we can agree on these things, but have a different point of view. Absolutely, we've got the constitutional right to bear arms. I think it's probably the most confusingly written of the amendments. I've got an article I was looking at here from Reason Magazine, all about what is a well-regulated militia, because it's often the crux of it comes down to that. And I just feel like we can't even agree on like the language of the Second Amendment, exactly what it means. This is a whole article here talking about what does that mean? What is a militia? What is well-regulated? And does that mean it was basically you got to be in the army? Is that what a well-regulated militia? Well, no. Back then, the idea was that, yeah, we had to have a state-run, well-regulated militia, but that should not, because of that, you should not infringe on the individual's right to possess guns, because they were often, the soldiers would bring their own weapons to fight. This is it's language and traditions lost to history that it's hard to make sense of in our context today. I think sometimes that the Constitution should be completely rewritten in more clear language. Of course it wouldn't be. Of course it would absolutely be written in legalese that would be impossible for the average. It would go from, like, you can read the Constitution all the way through in a pretty short amount of time and pretty much understand what's going on, except for like the florid language of the day, right? I feel like it should be rewritten, but then either one of two things would happen. It would be rewritten to suit a particular interpretation, right? Or it would just be rewritten a la Obamacare into like a 10,000 page thing that nobody could read and nobody would ever really understand. And so there'd be endless quibbling and micromanagement. Anyway, I'm not going to read through this article, but I recommend you check it out. Okay. Because yeah, there's a race also, as I talked about before, there's a racist history of gun control laws. Plenty of them that were meant to keep guns out of black people's hands after the Civil War. A lot of things that this country does. Here's another one of those dichotomies, right? The woke. I hate that term so much as a pejorative, because I think it is accurately, it's an accurate description of the phenomenon that's going on, is that we've been asleep. Many people have been asleep their whole lives, including myself for most of my life, asleep to the bad things that our country has done. We are steeped in Americana and patriotism and jingoism and all those other isms that tell us how great the American way and capitalism and everything's great. We're about freedom. We freed everything. But if you just look at history, you look at our actions, even since the founding and all the things that have happened right up until this current day, there's no doubt that you see there were tons of things that we were not taught traditionally in school. Many people were not taught, and their eyes open. Now, to a lot of people, this is what I really believe, a lot of people on the right, that it causes cognitive dissonance, severe cognitive dissonance. And the fact is that they never really looked at themselves or their country or their people in that way before. And the fact that they had lived in this candy colored, like red, white, and blue, fake American dream for so long, and they wake up to that, they just don't want to believe it. They don't want to believe any of it, because what they really believed, and many people staked their entire identities on, is this patriotism, maybe being in the military and owning guns and being pro-law enforcement and everything else that ostensibly to them the whole time was like, yes, I'm fighting, I'm on the side of good and justice, right? The police, the cops are the good guys. I don't think that's a controversial thing for somebody to have thought, given the state of our media and pop culture until very recent years. I think one of the first truly woke shows before they used that term was The Wire, HBO's The Wire, right? It was one that showed people are people, and it's a multifaceted world, and really complex social problems don't have simple answers. And that there absolutely is corruption and bad stuff going on all sides. Any show, any cop show that treated the cops just as purely good and fighting evil, and the drug dealing community or whatever, the bad guys as the bad guys and the good guys as always the good guys. It wasn't until the 70s and Serpico and whatever that we started getting more nuanced portrayals. That sort of went away for a while, and we got really back into this America, fuck yeah, my way or the highway scenario. That so many people actually believe in. Then there are those people that believe the exact opposite and saw that stuff and react against it, right? This is the conflict that we're in right now. And those people that rail against the woke, I seriously believe they're fighting their own brains, that are saying, oh man, everything I believed in wasn't as great as I thought it was. This is the same kind of thing that could go on if maybe you were a devout supporter of the Catholic Church. Okay, like my dad, my whole life growing up, went to church every week, donated money week in and week out. But after the Catholic Church scandal, by the way, same scandal is erupting right now in the Protestant Baptist conference. Same thing, right? The entrenched powers that be protecting those at the top at the expense of those at the bottom. There's nothing new to that, right? So this disgusted my dad in such a way that he kind of didn't move away from Jesus, didn't move away from God, but definitely moved away from wholeheartedly supporting the church. And honestly, I think it was a positive move for him spiritually and emotionally and everything else. Heavy shit we're talking about today, huh? How about a cartoon? You guys want to watch a cartoon? We're talking about all this government corruption. Let's watch something fun, right? Let's watch something that's government sponsored, but done with some artistic integrity. Let's watch some Bugs Bunny, huh? It's public domain, by the way. Let's go check it out in the cartoon theater, shall we? This is a great one. So this was produced with your taxpayer dollars, folks. By the way, I might get copyright struck for this music.
And a whiskers on his chin will soon be knocking at your door. And you ought to be in. The tall man with the high hat will be coming down your way. Get your savings out when you hear him shout, any bonds today. Come on and get him, folks. Come on, skip right up and get
Great stuffs.
any bonds today.
Supporting the military-industrial complex with your money.
What I'm selling, any bonds today.
Great animation. Beautiful music. Love it, man. What's not to like about this? This is the government.
Many stamps could I give pennies? Would be blessed. We all invest in the USA. Sammy, my Uncle Sammy.
Here comes the freedom man.
It can't make tomorrow's plan.
Not unless you buy a share of freedom today. Any stamps, any bonds today.
So there you go, folks. Government-sponsored racism as you like it. You know, that was really not strictly speaking bugs in blackface, just to put it in context. And I think there's no way anybody today would know, or young people today would understand that he was doing an Al Jolson impersonation. He was impersonating a specific entertainer of the day who happened to perform in blackface. Now, is that racist? Undoubtedly. In today's context, it was. Honestly, in its time of today, of its day, Jolson was considered one of the greatest entertainers. He was like one of the most popular people on the planet, certainly in America. And so this was a little homage produced with your tax dollars, including blackface. So if we want to talk about institutional racism sponsored by the government, it exists, folks. It happens, okay? Speaking of things happening, you know what's happening? You're happening. You stayed along with me on this journey today. We went from gun control to Gorns to free Bugs Bunny cartoons. I want to thank you guys for tuning into Danger Room. I want you to come back on Thursday. We're going to talk comic books. It's going to be all comics. $1 Million Mailbox is returning. I'm going to bring back Larry Young if he's got time. We'll look at all the great stuff you guys have been sending in. Until then, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.